I don't know why I chose to spend the weekend alone in that cabin. Maybe I want to clear my head. Maybe I want to test myself to see if I could handle solitude. I've never been the type to enjoy being alone, but something about the idea of being away from everything, no people, no internet, no distractions, felt like exactly what I needed. The cabin was about 3 hours from the nearest town, deep in the woods. I had rented it from an old man who barely spoke a word to me, just handed me the keys and nodded toward the trees. The drive, there was long, winding through dirt roads barely wide enough for my car. The kind of place where you could drive off the path and no one would find you for days. By the time I arrived, the sun was beginning to set behind the trees, casting long shadows that stretched across the clearing where the cabin stood. IT was small, old, but sturdy. The wooden walls were weathered. The roof sloped under the weight of years. A porch wrapped around the front, complete with a creaky rocking chair that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The windows were smudged with dirt, and the front door took more force than expected to shove open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and aged wood, a mix of something stale and something long forgotten. I set my bag down and took stock of my surroundings. There was a single bed against the far wall, a fireplace with a neatly stacked pile of firewood beside it, a kitchen area with outdated appliances, and a rickety wooden table with 2 chairs. It was simple, but enough for a weekend. I had brought enough food and water, and my phone, though I had no signal, could at least play music if I needed some background noise. I tried to settle in, but almost immediately, a feeling crept over me, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't fear, not yet, but an unease that made me hyper-aware of every sound, every creak of the cabin, every whisper of whine through the trees outside. I told myself it was just the unfamiliarity of the place. A new environment always takes some getting used to. That first night was rough. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the absolute silence around me. It wasn't like the silence in my apartment back home. This was deeper, heavier. It pressed down on me, making me feel smaller. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, some small noise would jolt me awake. A crack outside, a shifting board under the weight of the wind, the distant sound of something moving through the underbrush, and to T-some point, exhaustion won. I drifted into a restless sleep, waking up multiple times throughout the night, always with my heart pounding. I don't know what I expected to happen, but when morning finally came, I felt a little foolish for how tense I had been. It was just an old cabin in the woods. Nothing more that I spent the day exploring. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, thick with towering trees and dense undergrowth. The further I walked, the more I realized how easy it would be to get lost out here. The paths were barely visible, and without my phone's GPS working, I relied on marking trees with my knife to keep track of where I had been. The deeper I went, the more that unease returned. There was no sign of people, no footprints, no signs of life beyond the occasional rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I told myself it was paranoia. That's what happens when you're alone in an unfamiliar place. But even as I turned back toward the cabin, retracing my marked trees, the feeling stayed with me. By the time I reached the clearing, I was sweating despite the cool air. That night was worse. Much worse that I woke up to a sound outside. Something moving. Something big. I lay there, heart hammering, straining my ears to listen. The sound was slow, deliberate. Footsteps? No, too irregular. More like something dragging through the undergrowth. I reached for my flashlight, hand trembling slightly, and clicked it on. The dim glow barely reached past the windows, but enough to confirm I was still alone inside. I sat up, debating whether I should look outside. My instincts screamed no, but my rational mind argued that it was probably just an animal. A deer, maybe. A bear at worst. The cabin was sturdy. I was safe, but then I heard it again, closer this time. A dragging sound. Right outside the door, Dunham, light breath caught in my throat. I stood, moving as quietly as possible, and pressed myself against the wall beside the window. My fingers tightened around the flashlight, my pulse pounding in my ears. I forced myself to peek outside. Nothing. The clearing was empty. The trees stood still. The only movement was the slow sway of the branches in the wind. But something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air was thick with it, like a weight pressing down on me that I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I found tracks outside the cabin. Not animal tracks. Footprints. Bare, human footprints leading from the trees to my porch, stopping right at my door. The cabin had no lock that I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those prints, my mind racing through explanations. Maybe some lost hiker had passed through. Maybe some local had come to check on me. But why would they walk barefoot through the forest? Why would they come right up to my door in the middle of the night and then just leave? I want to pack my things and leave. Every instinct told me to, but a stubborn part of me refused to let fear drive me away. It was just one more night, and I could go home. That final night, I barricaded the door with a table and chairs. I kept my flashlight and a knife within arm's reach. I barely slept, lying there in the dark, waiting, listening to IT. Some point, the sound returned. The dragging to IT circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, gripping the knife so tightly my fingers ached. The sound stopped at the door. A long silence followed, and then a slow, steady knock that I didn't breathe. The knocking came again, harder this time. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to stay still. Minutes passed, then an hour, then longer. Finally, the knocking stopped. The dragging sound faded back into the woods. I didn't sleep at all at dawn. I shoved the furniture aside and bolted out the door. The footprints were back, circling the cabin, stopping and starting in places that made no sense. I didn't stop to study them. I threw my bag into the car, started the engine, and sped down that dirt road without looking back. When I returned the keys to the old man, he barely reacted. He just took them and nodded, as if he had expected me to be back early. As if he knew that I didn't ask. I didn't want to know that I won't ever go back.